Hello, I'm Gareth Hughes. This is the University Comms podcast. It's a little bit of a different setup today. I'm joined by Josh Patmore, and we're going to look ahead to the next year. 3 predictions for university communications in 2026. So thanks for joining me today, Josh. You're a legend. Love working with you. Great to have you here. Tell us a little bit about you before we get going.
Yeah, so thanks, Gareth. I am Josh Patmore. I started out my career at universities at Manchester Met Students' Union, where I was doing digital content and worked my way through to comms manager there and had a lovely time. And moved over to the University of Manchester and I've done various roles from student comms and social media and now student comms manager. But yeah, my background is all in video and content creation. So outside of work, I also run an Instagram and TikTok account for families, specifically families in the northwest of England. So make sure you give us a follow if that's where you're based.
And what is that? The address at the Patmores, right?
Would be useful to say, yeah, wouldn't it? It'd be at the Patmores, and yeah, we basically share the best days out, but it's a really good chance to make content and see what works.
Well, and that's why I thought when I was thinking of people to kind of look ahead at what might be coming up in the next 12 months, you were the first person I thought of because you've always been super forward thinking. So let's get cracking. What's your first prediction for 2026?
Right. So my first one is that I think if you think of this time next year, I think that the universities that are winning, that people are caring about, thinking about, talking about, I think they will have to have their own form of branded show. So okay. I think basically it doesn't necessarily have to be a show, but some sort of content format that belongs to the university that is different than what other people are creating. If you think about the content that universities put out at the moment, often that is maybe social media teams who've got a really cool idea and they've gone out and made a bit of content and it's done really well, and it's because they know that that's going to work and they've made it's a wicked idea, it's done well. I think the other side of it is you've got teams working on campaigns.
Yeah.
And they've delivered, part of that campaign is that they've delivered a piece of content for it or a series of pieces of content for it that do really well within the context of that campaign. But what I think is missing for a lot of universities is the bit that's consistent and recognizable and that they own. So there's some really cool research that I remember Kyle Campbell had shared, and that was around like the amount of podcasts that universities start that then just end after a few episodes because they're tied to a campaign. They're not tied to the university's overall story and mission. They're tied to something that they're trying to achieve. And once it ends, it stops. I think where universities can make a big impact and win is deciding what that message and that story is, and then creating something of their own that does that. And so the kind of examples that I've got in mind are things like, look at Dish by Waitrose, the podcast.
Yeah, I mean, so as someone who is currently recording this podcast extremely tired because I've stayed up till 2 a.m. watching Stranger Things, I'm delighted to see that Millie Bobby Brown is on the latest episode of Dish, but I am obsessed with that podcast. So
yeah, but so I literally saw that clip this morning, and I think that's what I'm in that sense. Like, I haven't been in a Waitrose since I was like 18. I worked at Channel 4 and there was a little Waitrose next to the office. I used to go and buy a little baguette for 30p because that's all I could afford. And that's my only experience with Waitrose. But at the minute, that's who I think about if I think about food, because that's the podcast that I see the clips on TikTok. People talk to me about it and it kind of owns my thinking. When I think of, if someone asks me what my favorite sandwich is, I'm straight away thinking of people on that show talking about that. And so what is that for a university? Like, what is the thing that we want to be known for? And that as soon as someone talks about it, we're who they think of. And so like the other example that I think about a lot is Cleo Abram, who's a YouTuber in the like science space and tech space, but she has a really specific lens that she looks at it through. So one of her shows is called Huge If True. And so the whole concept of that show is optimistic, positive science and tech discovery stories. So again, like if I'm seeing stuff online about AI and it's all doom and gloom and all this kind of stuff, straight away my brain thinks, well, I wonder what Cleo Abrams said about that, because that's going to give me an optimistic view. It's going to look at it from a different perspective. So I think it's universities needing to decide what that is, what's that voice, what's the thing you want to be known for, and then building a show around it. And again, with a social media kind of hat on, think about like she ends every episode with something along the lines of, if you want more optimistic science and tech discoveries, follow along. Like what can we say at the end of every piece of content that we put out that we can then deliver on the promise on? The next piece of content's going to also talk about that thing. The next episode, whatever it is, how can we deliver on that promise and then compound that feeling in someone that this is the place to go to for that information. This is the place that's the expert on that thing. And so it might mean like niching down slightly for some universities onto one thing and then making a show about that. But I mean, in that context, imagine if rather than Cleo Abram, I just said our university was the one you think of when you want optimistic views of research. That would be amazing. So there is quite a broad category that you could go into there and like win in that space if you did it. So that's kind of what I've got in mind. And I'll stop rambling for a second, but I've got other examples that have just come to my mind as well.
So what do you think at the moment is stopping universities from doing that? Like, why isn't that? Is it a thing that I'm sort of aware of? Are there other universities out there that are trying to produce shows or content series around like specific subjects? Is that happening already? And if not, why not?
Yeah, well, I think there definitely will be. And I think like off the top of my head, I can think of, for example, I can think of some American universities. I can think of a few that, or even that we do ourselves, where we kind of do have formats. So like, for example, things that we've done recently that and you see across the sector is those microphone videos. You'll see that kind of, that's a format that we use. Or you'll see we do these video postcards where it's still shots of campus and people. We kind of have formats and content types rather than a sort of our own show. And I guess the difference in where I'm thinking by the end of next year, people might get to, and you might see that it's working really well, is the kind of dedicated resourcing towards that as a project because of the understanding of what it's going to do for the university. So when you think about like these YouTubers, often like those, it might be a single creator, but behind them, there's like people helping on creative direction. You've got someone working on the editing or the cinematography. There are dedicated teams working on that one format and that one show and that one idea. Whereas often the way we're set up often is it's maybe part of your job. And that's why you're trialing it or it's linked to a campaign. And so you're doing it for a while and then that then fades and you're on to the next thing. I think it's about like committing to an idea. And I think part of that you need the real clarity of like why. What is the message that you want to be known for? And do we have any evidence that this format's going to build up and do well? So I think there is going to be, it's people latching onto something that works, hitting to it, and then doing it strategically. So just as another example, the one I just thought of was look at like Zach Polanski at the minute with the Green Party.
Like my WhatsApp groups with my friends, we talk about politics sometimes, but not, it's rare to see an individual figure cut through in a positive way. Normally, if I'm sharing something with my mates, it's basically taking the piss out of them, like some kind of funny meme about a politician. But he, in a really short space of time, seems to have managed to cut through.
Yeah, and it's kind of what I was thinking with that is like, there's obviously a bigger strategy behind it. He goes on other things. He does the rounds with media because obviously what he's talking about is very topical. He's a senior leader of a party, all those things. But I think about it from the lens of like, why can't universities are talking about a lot of these things or want to be or want to be seen to talk about a lot of the solutions to some of the things that are discussed. So what does it look like, for example, if a VC has their own podcast in that way? And again, not like necessarily an internal comms thing or not necessarily like linked to a specific campaign. But what does it look like if they own it to drive a narrative around the things that they want the university to be known for? And what does that look like if, for example, on Bold Politics, they're bringing on people intentionally to drive certain conversations? So if we wanted to have conversations around innovation, what does a repeatable format look like that has those conversations? Maybe you go out and get people from across the city or local regions or across the world to have debates about innovation, to have discussions about something topical, and you're then the people driving that conversation. And I think that's just the flip for me is kind of around going out, developing something that means that you are in control of the conversations that you want to lead on. Whereas often at the moment, university comms can feel quite fragmented because there's so many different topics being discussed at once. And I think just having, I guess my prediction is someone or multiple universities will have done it, defined it, and you'll see the real clarity and difference between someone who's got a really clear intention and voice and other people who maybe have little sparks of really good content or really good stories or messages, but you've got that less consistency and repeatability, if that's a word. I've just made that up.
No, it is, and it kind of is linked to my
lovely
prediction, which is a good segue. And it was actually something I just read down before, which is around attention fragmentation, as in like just people are split across so many channels. There's so much content that is being designed from the ground up psychologically to grab people's attention, stop people scrolling, focus on that content. And I think that my prediction was going to be basically that attention fragmentation would force universities to make fewer, bigger bets. So instead of trying to spread thinly across lots of different channels, instead of constantly churning out kind of low, not low quality, but like sometimes low performing content, instead of doing that, actually to refocus your efforts to kind of strategically like subtract and be like, actually we can have bigger impacts by doing fewer things in a bigger way. So that might be, like you say, launching a show and thinking about how, okay, so instead of talking about, I don't know, research by releasing press releases, I'm not suggesting that this is something that universities will do, but just as an example, why did we look at, like you said, launching a show to discuss this? Or instead of, thinking about internal communications or student communications, instead of drip feeding content over a prolonged period about something like, for example, student safety, let's really think about what a high performing big campaign would look like. Let's do fewer things, but do them in a bigger way. So I think it's about doing fewer things better and just being considerate of the fact that we live in an attention economy, and that's something that we need to think about as universities when we communicate. And universities that succeed over the next 12 months, I think, will be those that take on that challenge of attention fragmentation and do fewer, bigger things.
That's interesting. That's kind of was one of mine.
Kind of what
well.
you said, basically.
No, it's that was one of mine that I was thinking about, was that I guess one of my predictions was going to be that the word of the year next year would be around attention, and people's understanding of like the way that we talk, because I know for a fact that you've talked about that as a concept since I've met you. You've talked about the idea of needing to do less things but with more impact. So that's basically since I've met you, you've always thought in that way, and I know you do campaigns in that way as well. So I guess my question was going to be around, two questions. One is that your prediction? Do you think it will happen, or is it the thing that you think should? Because that's kind of what I was thinking about with some of these things.
I think that there's something that makes it more likely to happen, which is the context within which universities are operating now, which is when budgets are getting smaller, it kind of forces your hand to work in that way, to do fewer things because there's less resource. I think it potentially should have been happening anyway, but I think because of that people are going to have to work in this way, or I think it'll force the hand of the sector. So I see it happening more and more.
And then I guess my other question was, what are some like examples of this that you think, how would it look? What would be the difference this time next year? So like one thing that I thought of when you started talking about was like, I know you shared recently like around Birmingham doing those like an event for students during welcome or an event during winter and those kind of things. Is it that kind of stuff that you're thinking about where it's something more sort of large scale?
I guess so, yeah. So I think, like take Birmingham, they have like an amazing exams and assessments campaign every year. I think the budget under you would be extra. And there's also a lot of, I believe, activities focusing on like careers events and that kind of thing. But what they do is kind of bunch it all together into a week-long campaign. There's loads of cool stuff on campus. You can get like Ferris wheels, there's activities. So it's just more impactful. It's visible rather than drip feeding all of that content over like one semester and getting kind of fewer views. I think it's more impactful to work in that way. Yeah. Trying to think of another example.
I think there's loads though, isn't there? And I was trying to think about like the things that, in terms of like specifically university comms context, it's just that idea of like at the moment there's a lot that we do that we could work closely with other teams on. There's a lot of stuff that there's a lot of probably comms resource now that is split across an organization, isn't there? And it's that idea of essentially You don't want to be in competition with your own organization. You need to be working together to essentially communicate. You're trying to achieve the same goals and communicate with the same audiences. I think the attention's a good framing for that idea of people only have a limited, like a finite amount of attention that they can use. Again, like going back to that idea of having like these content formats, like part of that research around podcasts is that people only listen to or have like 3 shows that they can actively listen to or think of. And it's that idea of like what makes us, that's in the form of podcast. But again, like in terms of an email that you receive or like even the posters you see around campus, like whatever that piece of comms is, what is it about ours that deserves someone's attention? And I guess that's the difference of how I was thinking about it with mine, was like a shift from, we can all try and win people's attention, but what would actually deserve it? Like in terms of, I could say something mad on this episode and you could use the headline then as a clickbait title.
Yeah.
And that would get people's attention. But really, if we have an actually good conversation about things that provide value to people, that's what deserves attention. I guess that's where the shift should go, is towards doing things. And that's all linked back to knowing what you're trying to achieve before you start. And I think, again, just thinking about the reality for us in our jobs, I think that's it. It's being really clear on what we're trying to achieve. And then putting resource into those things.
Yeah, and I think the flip side of that is, I think if you don't move to that model, I think there's a risk that what you actually do is push out content that results in less attention, because people see something, don't like it, and then train themselves to ignore it.
Yeah. And I guess that's, again, going back to the other point, is that idea of like, if you can say at the end of, and again, this doesn't just apply to like a social media video, this could apply to like the newsletter that you send to a specific group of students or a specific group of staff. What is it about the end of that when you say there's another one coming next week, that people are like, they don't sigh and go, oh God, another one of these, that like, it's what makes them go, I'm now looking forward to that one. And that is, that is around attention. So that maybe leads me on to my next one.
Yeah, let's go.
Which is, I guess it's less of a prediction really. It's more, okay. I guess it's more of like let's call it a hot take. Lean into the clickbait and call it a hot take. But it's basically that I think a lot of universities and like us as comms people would talk about storytelling, but we don't do it very often in our comms. And I think by this time next year, I'm already seeing some of it actually across content really. And I think a lot more people will be actively telling stories and telling really compelling stories as well. So I just think at the moment, potentially that we talk about it and we're kind of moving in that direction. But if you think about universities, we have so many stories that we could tell, and so many of them do align with the things that we're trying to achieve. But often at the moment, I see that content is framed through a lens of a testimonial. It's through a lens of, we're telling you something that we want to say. And where I think stories really are showing you someone experiencing something, going through a change, going from one state to another, and what led them to that change in who they are and how they think and how they act. And so I think we'll see a lot more proper stories. I was going to say proper storytelling, but in the sense of...
Well, I was going to say, I think you're right. And I think the reason why you're saying proper storytelling is because I think it's almost becoming like AI, like 4 years ago, where people were talking about it as if it's some kind of like buzzy thing. I think I'm seeing the phrase storytelling being repeated across lots of different things that I'm reading now, creeping into like kind of, I was listening to BBC Sounds, that podcast that Nick Grimshaw and Annie Mac do recently, talking about Lily Allen's new album, and they're talking about storytelling, and they're talking about music and storytelling. It just feels like it's quite of the now. I'm not surprised that there's a lot of people trying to do it, but I guess the reason why I'm saying that is because my question for you is, what is good storytelling for a university? Like, what does that look like?
Yeah,
Sorry, that was a long-winded way for me to get to that question.
No, it's good. And Nick Grimshaw's getting all the shout-outs, and if he's got a Dish podcast, he's got this one.
He is, actually, yeah.
Essentially, the way that I think about it is, because anything could be a good story. Anything is, but it's the idea that you're passing on a piece of wisdom in some way. So a really good story takes something that's universally true and that we understand and that we feel, but we don't necessarily know how to say. and it says it. So you could say that within 30 seconds, or you could say it within 10 minutes. But it's when that truth is presented to you, you feel it and it resonates with you in some way. Like if I was going to talk to you about how being a dad has completely changed my life, the best way to do that is to show you what my life was like before and the beliefs that I had. And then the moment that it changed and the moment that I realized the difference, and that since then I'm a different person. I think it's that transformation. You kind of have to know the state I was in before to understand the state after. Whereas I often think, and this is obviously a broad assumption because a lot of content that universities do put out does tell really compelling stories. But I guess what we're talking about is more the ones that start from a place of, I'm going to communicate this message with you and to you. So we do it with, for example, with student stories, where what we're trying to do now is speak potentially with our content creators, and we're trying to understand from them what is something that's happening in your life that you've never articulated, but you can feel it. Like sometimes, like for some that we've got to are this idea of imposter syndrome, and like I'm doing university, but I don't necessarily know if I'm doing it right. And it's just a feeling that people have. And when we sort of extracted that idea and reverse engineered a story, that often starts with that point. It starts with, how's uni going? I don't know. I'm just trying my best and we'll see how it's going. And then by the end, we show, actually, you do know what you're doing. You're here for a reason. You're succeeding. And we show kind of, you've started in that potentially quite negative mindset, but it's relatable. People feel it. And we've ended up in the place of showing the difference. The sentiment on those videos and those pieces of content, whether it's an article or through an email, is always so positive. Yeah, it starts with quite a negative idea. And it's because you've taken someone on the journey with you. And so I think universities in general need to be less afraid of saying how people feel and pulling out those things that it might be quite a negative experience. But if you can start there, then when you get to that end resolution of how you want it to be or how potentially it actually is, people feel it a lot more.
Why is that important?
I guess in the context of that content is how you engage with it. Like we go back to things being memorable, and what you were talking about, the amount of noise that there is for people. The things that are going to get my attention now are things that are providing me some sort of value or are speaking directly to me. And again, that's something I think universities have an opportunity. When we talk about storytelling, no one is going to speak to our audiences in a way that we are. Like no one has the knowledge of, whether it's students, I'm thinking from a student lens now, but like you could think of this from your staff, or you could think of it from even alumni and other audiences, external audiences. But you can speak to them in a way that McDonald's can't, or these other random companies, because they're speaking to them on quite a broad level. We've got a specific lens to look through. And so I think we need to take the things from that. If you think now, storytelling as an example is every year, all of the Christmas adverts, they do storytelling. And the thing that does it it's not because it's like fancy cameras and big budgets and twinkly music. It's the bit about it that makes it a story is it passes on some sort of information that you need and that helps you be a better person in your life. And I just think as universities, that's what we are trying to do often. And the message is that if we want to communicate something about a piece of research, often we present it as in that news lens of look at what we've discovered and look at this. Whereas often it's how does that affect my life? There's usually a human story in it that we could extract and tell that's going to resonate with people on a deeper level, even if it doesn't reach as widely. So I think that's why I think it's important is again, like you were talking about, building that relationship with people and how memorable we are, people thinking of us and having like positive association with us. I think that's stories are the best way of us doing that.
I believe that would kind of help with that sense of belonging as well. So if you're thinking from a university perspective, if you're thinking about people that belong to a university community, so alumni, students, staff, prospective students, that I think seeing stories that make you feel something makes you feel an affinity and a sense of belonging to the institution.
Yeah, definitely. And I just think, I guess what the angle that I'm coming at it from, because this is the kind of stuff that we've been talking about a lot internally as well, is that this idea of there's always we need to understand what the overall story that we want to tell is. And I guess it actually goes through everything that we've been talking about really. It's just this idea of like, what are we actually trying to say? If we need to say less, if we know that people can take on less information and we are desperately trying to stand out and show why we are unique and why we add value, then we need to, there are so many stories that can do that. When you asked earlier around why don't we do this as much, I think the reason why we often don't is, as universities, we're set up to communicate with people, like we're to share messages. And so we've got a lot of colleagues who do great work in getting the messages that we need to get out to the right people. And I think it's probably just slightly changing that focus to thinking about what story does that tell, and all those pieces together combined. How does someone feel as a result of the experience? Again, going back to retention, going back to the way that they consume content. So yeah, it's like the experience that people have, and stories are super important in that.
Okay, so I think we've got 3 big predictions for 2026. So shall we just scoot back to the beginning and kind of put what our predictions were? So we've got this idea of universities needing show.
Yeah, you could say there's an opportunity for universities to like have their own owned media or branded IP, things that belong to them that's instantly recognizable. It's like set out the conversation in the direction that you want it to go, rather than trying to chase the conversation.
Yeah. Then we talked about attention being the big word of 2026 and why that's important. And then I kind of linked to that. My prediction was around fewer, bigger bets as a result of, I guess, what I always call attention fragmentation. But remind us again, why is attention going to be the big word in 2026?
Essentially, we all know that we have a limited amount of attention, but you'll hear all that stuff about people have short attention spans. We don't. You stayed up until 2:00 this morning watching Stranger Things. Literally watching a whole series of David Attenborough with my son because he loves animals and stuff. So we'll watch and we'll spend all of our time on the things that we care about and that provide value for us. So people are being a lot more conscious of where they use the resource of their attention. And so we need to be a lot more conscious of the value we provide in the things that we're asking people to use their attention on.
And final prediction, which is linked to that, is that storytelling will help us grab people's attention. And why is that?
Yeah, essentially that we have so many stories that we could tell. It's like a massively untapped resource. Every single university has unique stories to them. So again, that isn't something in a way that would be competing with each other on. Like, you all have unique stories to share, and so the quicker and more effectively we can lean into that and use our resources as comms people to find and tell those amazing stories that are unique to us, the more people are going to think positively of our organizations and know what it is that we're trying to communicate, because those stories should be linking to what we're trying to say as organizations.
Josh, thank you. We'll do this again in 12 months and we'll see what happened across the sector and whether we were right. If people want to stay in touch to hear more insight from you, where should they head?
They can say hi on LinkedIn, or they can follow, if they're based in the Northwest and they've got kids, they can follow the Patmores and they can see all our adventures as a family as well. So, but yeah,
grabbing LinkedIn, a lot of attention, that account.
Yeah.
Cool. All right. Well, thank you so much. That's really interesting. And yeah, we'll see you in the next few months whether we're right. Speak to you soon.